Aloha, it's me, Roberto Wylde, and this is a new series I plan on doing where I review fantasy short films here on YouTube. That's right, I will be looking at short films. You know, I just thought it'd be a fun and interesting idea to sort of just see what sorts of fantasy content people here on YouTube are making. You know, and I don't see many people talk about the fantasy films that people make. Believe it or not, there's quite a bit of them actually, and some of them are pretty good, and some of them are not so good. So, since this is a new show, I'm trying to feel out the format. I've kind of got a format for my other stuff that I'm going to be coming out with soon, but for this, we're just going to kind of go for it. It's going to be really chill, going to be really relaxed, and I think it'll be a fun activity that we can sort of share together, as it were, I guess. Yeah, so this is how it's going to work. Each new episode will cover 5 fantasy short films. These shorts can be anything that's not, a full-length movie. So we're looking at videos between 5 to nearly 40 minutes in length. Though I'm pretty sure anything past 40 minutes is just essentially a movie at that point. I'll sort of analyze each short film, kind of break them down as simply as possible, kind of give my thoughts, go over all of the pros, the cons, and we'll try to do this as concisely as possible. At the end, I'll pick my favorite and least favorite short film. Now, for your viewing pleasure, I have linked every single one of these short films down in the description below, so feel free to watch them first and maybe come back to the video, or you can watch them after the fact. I am going to be spoiling stuff in these short films, so if you want to keep a fresh perspective, feel free to go watch them and come right on back. So without delaying this too much more, let's get into the first fantasy film. The Wayfarer. The Wayfarer is a 16-minute short film released by the channel Tavern Brawl. It's directed by John Shaw and stars Joshua Winter as Grey Wall the storyteller. The Wayfarer is less of a short film and more of a proof of concept, but we'll cover that particular bridge here in a moment. The story centers around Grey Wall, who is in a tavern during a storm. A little girl asks him to tell her story, to which he obliges her with the legend of the Wayfarers, who were a group of magical warrior heroes. The legend covers the land's history, how an evil queen threatened to destroy the world, and the damage she wrought to the many races who inhabit it. Despite being only 16 minutes in length, the short film is packed with lore, character, and charm. Tavern Brawl built an incredible world which is easy to understand, but still feels unique in many aspects. The elves, for instance, are seafarers in this world, and goblins sort of fill the role that dwarves usually would. The animated sections are well written, and the music is organic. The whole world feels like a fleshed out concept, even if we're only given bits and pieces of it throughout the short film. There's this cool magic system they introduced, which has this whole storm motif to it, and though they never really spend a lot of time expositing about how it works and all the other intricacies of it, it's designed well enough that I started to piece together how it worked all the same. I think it's also important that the magic system be easy to get a hold of right from the get-go, because in the end, this short is representing a much larger story, and so the magic needs to be a little more than just swish and flick. What's nice about the magic system is that on top of being easy to grasp, I can already see how maybe they could explore this later on down the line. And that sort of thing is really important for a proof of concept. Speaking of the Wayfarer as a proof of concept in general, it sounds just really fun and interesting. You know those classic D&D settings where they have, adventurers come in, they stop at the tavern, they meet, and they get to know each other. That's the kind of concept they want to explore, where a bunch of adventurers come together in a tavern, and that's the story. It's just in a cool world with fun characters, doing shenanigans, enjoying life, however it may be. And this whole short film is sort of an introduction to that world, to the concepts that are going to be in it, and the stuff they hope to explore later on. And I don't know about you, but that sounds pretty fun to me. I feel like I could have a good time. I feel like I could have a good time just, watching something like that. However, there are only a handful of issues I have with the short film. First, there are parts of Grey Wall's voiceover during the animated segments which I think could have used another take. So, for example, there are times where he's trying to give his lines and there's a pause, there's a weird sort of delivery on a word. I feel like another take or two would have really helped the quality of the voiceovers, though in general, I think they're pretty good overall. They're not terrible, but I noticed it, and really, to be fair, most probably won't. The people at Tavern Brawl built an entire tavern for this short film. And I will say that while the tavern set is really impressive, I feel like if you want your tavern to be lived in, it should have more pictures of people on the walls, drawings, flags, trophies of warriors, Kind of like I mentioned, it was done by a bunch of people, family, friends, coming together to make a fantasy property, and for what we got, it's pretty good. So I can't really dwell on those sorts of details too much. Overall, it's a pretty decent proof of concept, and a fun watch for those who are a fan of fantasy films. They have a Kickstarter page where they hope to flesh out the world and story into a series. They currently have a pilot funded, and the campaign is closed. But you can go to the Indiegogo page for more information, where they have concept art, plans for how it's going to be done, how the show's going to look, and all the other good stuff. I'm personally curious to see where they go, and if you are too, feel free to check them out in the description below. Distance. The next short is Distance, a 36-minute short film released by the Norwegian channel Andiax. A little stipulation here, I ain't Norwegian. I don't know how to say half these names, so I'm gonna pronounce them the best I can, and hopefully Odin doesn't smite me. The short film stars Odin Wage, speak of the devil, and Emily Johannesson, and is directed by Anders Overgaard. Despite being a little long, the film is one of the most well-produced fantasy films I've seen here on YouTube thus far, and was basically done with no budget either. The story is about Emil, who is coping with the loss of his grandfather. When Emil was young, his grandfather told him tales about a mythical world hidden in a secret chest. One day, while hosting a party, Emil meets his old friend Nina, and the two catch up, only to discover the magical chest, and as they go to investigate it, are swept away into a magical world. The channel which made Distance is a professional film company full of talented people. The shot composition, the pacing, the locations, the colors, all of it, with maybe a few exceptions, seems incredibly professional. In fact, the team documented the filming and development of Distance from the conceptual phase all the way up to its post-production. Basically, they go from beginning to end on the whole process of making this short film, from getting the costumes to the makeup. It's very interesting how much work went into this production, and basically for no budget. It's kind of incredible. The acting is pretty decent, especially Odin, who I could tell had some acting experience prior to filming. And yeah, he's a real actor. He does all that professional stuff and everything. The other actors work, but some are definitely stronger than others. But overall, stronger or weaker, they do give a good performance regardless. The props are also pretty good, some of which, like this chest here, were provided to Andiax by a channel called Nerdforge here on YouTube. The story in general is pretty good in the first act, but I found the fantasy parts to be where it was weakest. I personally feel like the fantasy element didn't serve as strong a role in bringing Emil and Nina together as it could have, and honestly the film might have been better set purely in the real world. The fantasy is okay, but there's a million and one different ways that you could have retold this story without doing it in a fantasy setting. And honestly, the fantasy really isn't unique enough for me to really warrant remembering it. In general, it makes these parts feel a lot weaker than they should, especially since I feel like I can't connect to this fantasy world all that well. This short is a good example of how, even on a low budget, if you have a good crew, an earnest story, and an understanding of the craft, anything is possible. Sadly, the short film has only 88,000 views as of the making of this video, but that may be because of the thumbnail, which is pretty weak. I don't think it does this brilliant short film justice. And just look at it, it's just him sort of like with the bow and stuff. It's nothing really interesting is happening here. Anyway, let's move on. From the Veil. From the Veil is a 10-minute short film released by the channel Gearmark TV. And it's It's directed by Guy Lorio. It features Steven Huff as a soldier named Targus, and Brandon White as this orc guy. Gearmark TV produces many short films, and it's clear they have access to some high-end resources because this looks almost too crisp, like, jeez. If normal shot composition were water, it'd be like a Dasani or something real simple like a generic Nestle bottle or something like that. No, this is like Fiji water. Or those obscure brands of water you don't see outside of a Whole Foods or Starbucks or something. I mean, with most stuff, it tastes like water, but this, it's super high quality, like, woof, you can taste all the added minerals and everything, oof. The story is pretty straightforward. It centers on a knight who fights for a human kingdom. As the sole survivor of a big battle that happened between the orcs and humans, he seems to be the last man left on the battlefield before a wandering orc finds him. The two battle each other before realizing they're more alike than they initially thought. The story plays out pretty much as you'd expect, which isn't terrible, but it lacks tension because of it. I mean, based on the setup, you already know there's going to be a part where he reminisces about his love. And then there's going to be the part where it's revealed that the orc has a wife. And then there's going to be a part where they look at each other and realize they both have necklaces from their loved ones. And then it plays out the way that you'd think it does. Though, for the most part, the armor and makeup and even the effects are well done, and it's clear Gearmark TV has a lot of experience in those areas. However, the weapons are kind of, they're kind of weird. They're just so big and out of place, and yeah, it's kind of off-putting. The problem, at least in my opinion, is that since we haven't been given the proper context to justify these elements being in the world, these honkin' chunky looking weapons are a little too comically large, and their designs are a bit over the top, and they seem just the tiniest bit out of place because of it. Also, the green screen is a little too clean. And because it's so clean, one can see where the set and the green screen meet, and you can see it in pretty much every single shot. It's just a tiny bit distracting. It also doesn't help that the story takes place in the middle of nowhere, not near any sites of significance or anything interesting to look at. Hell, it's supposed to be in a battlefield, but there's no bodies anywhere. There's like 4 or 5 guys out there. Why were they fighting in the middle of nowhere? This place looks less like a battlefield and more like a character customization area in an RPG or something. The short is undoubtedly well produced, and the story is perfect for a short film format. However, it could have done with a little more narrative weight, and the background area could have been a lot more interesting to look at. Not a bad short by any means, but it's definitely flawed in a lot of other areas. An Elven Accord. An Elven Accord is a 5-minute short produced by the channel Apsis Motion Pictures, and it's interesting, but mostly This is a much more traditional short film, wherein a bunch of friends get together and shot something with no more than a fresh idea and whatever resources they had on hand. The story centers on an elf played by Dan Carter, who is an elven diplomat. His goal is to help settle the peace between the human and elven lands and deliver a message to this elven city. I'm not really sure where it is, but he's got to get to it, and that's all that matters in the end. Once he arrives, he finds it under siege and mostly destroyed. As he continues on, he encounters some soldiers, where they fight before striking a deal with him. There's some impressive shots in this short film, which look better than some shots I've seen in Dragon Hunter or films like Knights of the Damned even. However, for every interesting shot, there's also ones that are kind of like this. This is a short film and it's made by a bunch of friends, so I won't trash on it too hard. But it is a little distracting and would have benefited from some sort of other dynamic shots and make this whole scene, especially in the beginning, look a lot less flat. The most interesting aspect of this short film is the kung fu fight sequences and choreography. While still rough, it's an earnest attempt at blending kung fu fighting with high fantasy. You see this in the wuxia genre, I think that's how you say that, in movies like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and those sorts of films. And I think it was a really interesting approach blending Western high fantasy with Eastern martial arts. And for the most part, the kung fu is handled well. However, I feel like the story is just too big for an action-oriented short film. Typically, short films like this need to have simple stories since, there's not much time to flesh out the world. This would have been a decent 30 to 45 minute film, but there's so much lore and exposition that the good stuff, which is the kung fu martial arts fights, gets kind of pushed off to the side. Really, it should have just established, hey, this guy's delivering a message. He's walking on a road, he finds some guys that are part of a raider group or something, and he fights them. I mean, I could go pretty deep into how I think it should have been done, but I digress. An Elven Accord is a bit messy, and the filmmaking isn't the best, but it has some impressive fights, and is an earnest attempt to blend martial arts fighting with high fantasy. Elixir. Elixir is a 5-minute short film on Justin Stagg's channel, and it is also okay. The difference between this film and some of the others here is this one seems to have been done to practice filming rather than making a fantasy short just because. To me, if you look at his channel, I think Justin wanted to take a crack at sort of handling some specific sorts of effects and all sort of tied together in a fantasy short film. The story itself follows an unnamed little girl, played by, oh boy, you're gonna have to just pardon me for a second, Isis Arakivits. This is the name right here. Yep, that's it. Her character is wandering through a dying forest. While not far behind, she is being chased by an evil crimson spirit. Later, this crimson spirit manifests into a cool-looking tree deer monster and continues to assail her. They kind of have this engagement for a time, but using her magical abilities, the girl manages to overcome the monster. It's a pretty simple short, and has no dialogue in it. The entire project itself seems to be an exercise in using lighting, CG effects, and other technicals, kind of for the reasons I mentioned before. I'm open to being wrong, but That's the way it seems, at least on the surface. Because Justin was doing this for practice, it's essential to build a story which showcases these elements while also telling a cohesive story. And for the most part, I think he did that pretty well. In general, the effects, makeup, and the mystical world Justin created is interesting and has a lot of personality and style to it. In this regard, I think he succeeded in what he was setting out to accomplish. So I would count it as a win for him. I know he was showing this crimson mist kind of earlier in the beginning, but honestly, I think the cooler design is this monster. And I think it would have been more interesting to see this thing chasing her through the woods. I also think some added context as to who these characters are, kind of what they represent, or why they're chasing each other, may have helped me connect to the story a little better. Regardless, I still understand what's going on, despite the absence of dialogue. While I have a lot of things to say about small elements like that, overall the short film is done alright. Elixir is a fine demonstration of Justin's ability to utilize CG and other special effects in a fantasy setting. While not great, the short film is visually interesting and concisely demonstrates Justin's skills all set under a dark fantasy umbrella. And now we're going to talk about my favorite of the bunch this time around. The way I constitute my favorite is it's a combination of how well the short was made, the story, and just how much I personally enjoyed the film altogether. I'll be factoring in things like production value, acting, and all those other elements I traditionally sort of look out for when, viewing media. So I'm gonna sort of pack those things together, and we're just gonna use that as the framework for which one is gonna be the best. So yeah, my favorite short film this time around is The Wayfarer. Give it up for The Wayfarer. Yes. That's right, The Wayfarer is my favorite of the bunch. Now, on an objective level, the best film was really Distance, as it had some of the best production value I'd overall seen this time around. But I find myself more personally in love with the world and story of The Wayfarer rather than Distance. Because of The Wayfarer's creativity, the world it pitched, and the story itself, the in-universe music, the charming characters. I like taverns. I think they're cool. This is all about taverns and stuff. Yeah, it's my personal favorite. So considering all of that, I had to give it to The Wayfarer. My least favorite, however, had to be an Elven Accord. Like I mentioned before, the Elven Accord has some good stuff to it. There's some good shots, costumes are interesting, but this opening scene is really not shot well. The camera looks weird when they're trying to do this shaky cam thing to kind of add some motion and energy to the scene, but it's already really well choreographed, and the kung fu itself is fast and heavy hitting enough that generates enough energy as it is. So I don't know why you'd have to add this sort of like camera movement. It just isn't helping the shots at all. I also think the writing in this one's just not the best. And like I said, it really should be about the kung fu, it should be about the fight, it should be about capturing that energy and sense of fun when you watch a kung fu movie. While the fight is fine, it really just needed to be the focus, and all the other extra kind of lore and setup just wasn't really needed. But I digress. So that's our list of fantasy short films for today. So leave a comment below about what your favorite was, or if you have any thoughts on the selection of films this time around. If there's any shorts, fantasy, or sci-fi you'd like me to look over, you can follow me on Twitter. I leave it at the end of all my videos and send the description below, so you can follow me at RealWylde on Twitter. And that'd be a good place to send to. I'm just saying. And if you like this video, please be sure to leave a like. It supports the channel. If you like these types of videos and you want to see more fantasy and science fiction reviews by yours truly, why not subscribe as well? Any sort of criticism to maybe improve the quality of these short film reviews would be really nice. The video's over now. You can go.